Time for the Roots and Roots Show with your host, Greg Rashid. Bringing you history and music from the Black American diaspora. The goal of this show is to empower you with information that you can then seed and grow within your community. Now, here's your host, Greg Rashid.
I want to say good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone all over the universe that's listening to the program. This is Greg Rashid with another edition of the Root and Roots Show. For many of you, you listen at your convenience on various platforms on the internet. But a lot of people listen every Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. Mountain Time on KUHSdenver.com, created by the one and only Henry Archuleta. And I want to say hi to all my friends in the Colorado region. I hear that it's snowing there right now, so hopefully you just stay warm. I'm going to send some of this 90-degree weather from Bangkok to you right now so you can get that Thai weather and just melt all that snow and have some warm vibes on you. But today we're going to have a great show. I am just honored to interview Adam Hennick, the author of a new book. It's about Frank Wills. And some of you may be saying, well, Frank Wills, who's Frank Wills? You should know Frank Wills because he is someone that everyone, not only in the U.S., but the world should know about Frank Wills. So rather than just get into detail by me talking right now, I'm going to get into the interview with Adam Hennick and his new book. So we'll hear that right now on the Root and Root Show. And this interview is so special that I really hope that you will tell your friends, tell everyone to tune in, copy the show, just send it to everyone. So let's hear the interview right now on the Root and Root Show. And again, this is Greg Rashid with the Root and Root Show, and I am so honored today. I am just so honored to have on this program an author who has written a overdue book, a bio of someone that you should know in history. You should know this person, but as he mentioned in the book, a lot of people don't know him. And I'm talking about Frank Wills, the Night Watchman. The name of the book is Watergate's Forgotten Hero. Frank Wills, Night Watchman, and the author is Adam Hennick. And are you there, Adam?
I am. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for being on the program today. I just love this book. As I said off air to you, it is going like to the top of my list of my favorite books because you've written about someone I've always wanted someone to write about. I mean, Frank was just his just being just there and doing his job as a night watchman, as a security guard, actually brought down a whole presidency and actually saved the country. And I just want you to tell my listeners, first of all, how you arrived at writing this book, why you decided to write this particular book, and talk about in particular, the person who inspired you as far as writing this book, because I was amazed. I didn't know this. So yes, just tell my listeners about this.
Well, again, thank you for having me. It started with Alex Haley, who was, of course, the author of Roots, the co-author of the autobiography of Malcolm X. And he was also the subject of my first book. And when I was doing research about Alex Haley, I learned after Roots that he had a lot of ideas for books that he wanted to write. And unfortunately, none of them ever came to fruition. And one of the topics that he was looking into was Frank Wills. And I wasn't familiar with who Frank Wills was. I didn't know anything about him. And I was curious. And so while I was working on this book about Alex Haley, I wanted to learn just a little bit about who Frank Wills was. And as I learned more and more about him, I thought to myself, this would make a good subject for a book because there had never been one written about him. And what I ultimately learned is that if it weren't for Frank Wills, there would be no such thing as Watergate, as what we know it today. There would be Watergate, the building, the office building, the hotel, the complex, but it certainly wouldn't resonate beyond that. We call every scandal today, we add the suffix, the gate to it because of this scandal, all
Right.
because of a night watchman.
And I know a lot of people don't even realize, why do we call certain things gate? Steroid gate as far as in baseball and everything. And a lot of people don't realize that. It's because of Watergate and what happened in June of 1972. So tell my
Yeah.
listeners a little more about that.
So we are coming upon the 50th anniversary of the famous break-in. And so Frank Wills was a 24-year-old night watchman. He was in charge of essentially, as his job title suggested, watching the building at night when no one else was there, or when he thought no one else was there. He was paid just barely above minimum wage. He had no weapons other than a can of mace in his bare fists. And he was in charge of guarding a building that was home to the Federal Reserve, as well as the Democratic National Committee, which at that time was working on the 1972 presidential campaign of George McGovern. And so there were a lot of obviously important things happening in this office building that was really in the heart of DC, not too far away from the White House. And Frank Wills, who didn't even have a high school diploma, was in charge of watching it on the night of June 16th, 1972. And ultimately, obviously, what happens is he detects that there's someone else in the building when he's there. And Frank, unlike most guards, they would probably have just ignored all of the signs that something amiss was happening. But Frank didn't. And he took it upon himself to look into the matter. He called his supervisor, and eventually he called the police. And when the police arrived, they arrested 5 burglars. And those burglars was the catalyst for a political scandal that ended up forcing the only resignation in U.S. history of a president. And that was, of course, Richard Nixon.
I mean, it's just an amazing story. And the fact is, to back up a little bit, these guys attempted another burglary, I guess, a year prior to that. And talk about that, because it's the same situation.
Yeah. So there's another guard very similar to Frank Wills in terms of his background as well, although he wasn't from South Carolina. Anyways, he too was guarding a building. It was actually the Brookings Institute, which is a think tank that the Democrats, utilize, for their policies and data analysis and things like that. And he was on duty, although it wasn't as late as it was with Frank Wills. But he was on duty one night, and there were these 2 men. We don't know who they were, but they approached him, said that they wanted to see this particular person who works there. And what happened was he said, well, I need to see your identification. I need to call this person and make sure that he's expecting you. And they said, no, you don't need to do that. We're here to see so-and-so, and please let us in. And he said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he held his line, and these 2 men tried to push their way through, but they weren't successful, and they left. And that was just about a year before Frank Wills' incident. And he was commended for that later on, but nothing to obviously what Frank Wills experienced in terms of experiencing a 15 minutes of fame.
15 minutes of fame, which should have lasted a lifetime. Hopefully, and your book, I think, will bring back Frank Willis. For a lot of folks don't know. If you're just tuning in, listeners, I'm talking with Adam Haynick, author of the new book, Watergate's Forgotten Hero, Frank Wills, Night Watchman. Is on McFarland Press. Now, tell my listeners, how a little about Frank as far as you mentioned, where he came from, but the type of person he was.
Well, Frank was very typical of his generation. He was born in 1948 in Savannah, Georgia, to a single mother. Uh, the father is unknown, although I was able to track down a name, but it wasn't clear if it was the first name or the surname.
Right.
But basically, he had no father figure in his life. His mom was a domestic, which was basically she was a maid, and they lived in very modest, living conditions. Some of which we think there was no indoor plumbing, no electricity. This was very common in the South in the late 40s and the early 50s. You had these separate and unequal situation going on. This was Jim Crow South. And so while on one side of the town, everyone had all of the amenities that you would expect, you go to the other side of town, the black side of town, it was a completely different reality. And there were certain expectations that, certain things that you just didn't do if you were Black and you were living in the South. Now, Savannah was much more progressive than its fellow Southern cities, but it still was the South and there still
Right.
was segregation. And so Frank Wills, like millions of other African Americans, he grew up under this culture. He lived in Savannah for about 5 years, and then he moved to North Augusta in South Carolina. Same thing, same situation. He went to different schools than white people. He lived separately from white people. The only interaction with white people, in terms of his mom, was that the homes that she would clean. Frank had very minimal interaction. And it really wasn't until he left the South that he actually encountered white people for the first time as contemporaries. But basically, Frank had no father figure. He was very poor. They moved around a lot. He wasn't a good, consistent student. He got distracted a lot. He daydreamed a lot. He was a bit of a loner. And unfortunately, Frank didn't finish high school. He got his then girlfriend pregnant, and he ended up dropping out of high school and he joined Job Corps. And Job Corps is still around today, although it's not as popular as it was when it came out. And this was part of the War on Poverty initiative that was launched by President Lyndon B. Johnson. And before Johnson channeled all of his resources to Vietnam, he was on track to become perhaps one of the greatest presidents. He and his administration had come up with a plan to end poverty in America, to end racial inequality. And they called it the War on Poverty. And it was obviously long overdue. And Wills was a product of that. He joined Job Corps. Job Corps was a program for people just like Frank Wills. They had very little career skills. They didn't have much of an education. And this was a way to bridge that gap by acquiring useful skills. And so Frank was sent to Battle Creek, Michigan, where he learned about the automotive industry and how to work in a factory. And he also learned how to cook, and so he became he developed skills that allowed him to obtain jobs. And so he eventually found his way to Detroit. He worked on the assembly line there, and then he ends up getting a job. He didn't really like it, found it very mundane, and then he ended up getting a job as a security guard for a department store. And he finds he has a pretty good knack for it. Frank's about 6 feet tall, weighed about 165 pounds, nice and lean. He had a mustache, and he just had a certain presence about him that, although seems like he was a very nice person, he also had a certain, I think, firm presence, and I think that helped him as a security guard. Well, eventually he finds his way to DC. There are more job prospects there.